The cold steel bars surrounded Joan Little, a 20-year-old black woman, accused of breaking and entering. Her fate seemed sealed in a small-town North Carolina jail. But one night in 1974 would rewrite history. What happened behind those walls would transform her into a symbol of justice and put her life on the line in a courtroom battle that gripped the nation. A chilling silence hung in the air as Joan lay in her cell at the Beaufort County Jail. In the early hours of August 27, heavy footsteps disturbed the stillness. Clarence Alligood, a 62-year-old white jailer, approached with a menacing presence. But he was not there on official duty. His intentions were far more sinister. The flickering light cast shadows across the damp walls as Alligood stepped inside. An ice pick gleamed in his grasp. He did not ask. He demanded, trapped within concrete walls, understood the grim reality of her situation. There was no one to call for help, no escape route in sight. The choice before her was impossible: surrender or resist. Fear surged through her veins, but so did defiance. As Alligood moved closer, she seized her only chance. A desperate struggle erupted in the darkness. The air filled with the sound of shuffling feet, muffled grunts, and sheer survival instinct. The power dynamic that had once favored her attacker shifted in an instant. Somewhere in the chaos, Joan's fingers found the ice pick. The moment demanded action. Without hesitation, she struck. The sharp weapon plunged into Alligood's chest. He staggered, his strength failing. The man who had once held authority over her now collapsed, lifeless, onto the cold concrete floor. A deafening silence followed. Joan's breath came in ragged gasps. The weight of what had just transpired pressed down on her. She had survived. But at what cost? The walls that once caged her now seemed even more suffocating. Staying was not an option. Every second that passed felt like a countdown to the inevitable. The jailhouse door swung open as she fled into the night. Panic and adrenaline fueled her steps, but the world outside offered no sanctuary. A massive manhunt soon followed, the headlines painting her as both a fugitive and a murderer. The system that had failed to protect her was now determined to punish her. Within days, she surrendered to authorities. The courtroom awaited, and with it, a battle for her very existence. Could a black woman claim self-defense against a white man and walk free? The eyes of the nation turned toward the trial that would challenge deep-seated biases and redefine justice itself. The trial was not just about Joan Little. It was about every woman forced to fight for survival, every person silenced by a system designed to control them. The verdict would set a precedent, but the question remained: would justice prevail, or would history repeat its cruel cycle? Joan Little did not run forever. A few days after the deadly struggle, she surrendered, knowing the justice system might never see her as a victim. Instead of investigating why she fought back, authorities swiftly charged her with first-degree murder, a crime that carried the death penalty in North Carolina. In their eyes, she was not a survivor. She was an inmate who had killed a white man, and for that, she would pay the ultimate price. News of her arrest spread like wildfire, and the public response was deeply divided. Some believed she was a violent criminal who had manipulated the system, while others saw her as a woman trapped in an impossible situation, left with no choice but to fight for her life. The case was no longer just about Joan. It became a battleground for America's ongoing struggle with race, gender, and self-defense rights. With every headline and courtroom hearing, the stakes grew higher. Joan's life was on the line, but so was the question of whether a black woman could ever be justified in defending herself against a white attacker. Civil rights groups and feminist organizations rallied to her defense, seeing her case as a painful reflection of a system that had failed women like her for generations. But her critics pushed back, arguing that the law must take its course, no matter the circumstances. Her trial was not just about one night in a jail cell. It was about who had the right to survive. Could a woman's desperate attempt to protect herself be considered murder? And if the law refused to recognize her self-defense, what did that mean for every other victim who had ever fought back? Joan's fate would be decided in a courtroom, but her story was already a turning point. The battle lines were drawn, the nation was watching, and the verdict would send a message that reached far beyond the walls of that North Carolina courthouse. July 1975 marked the beginning of a legal battle that would test the boundaries of justice. Joan Little walked into a Raleigh, North Carolina courtroom, facing a system that had rarely ruled in favor of someone like her. She was not just fighting for her freedom. She was fighting for the right to defend herself. At the center of her defense was William Kunstler, a formidable civil rights attorney, who argued that Joan had every legal and moral right to resist sexual violence, even if it meant killing her attacker. The prosecution, however, was determined to dismantle that argument. They framed Joan not as a victim, but as a manipulative criminal who had orchestrated the encounter for her own gain. Outside the courthouse, her trial became a national rallying cry. Civil rights leaders and feminist activists saw Joan's case as part of a much larger struggle, one that exposed how the justice system had historically failed black women who had been victims of sexual violence. This was not just about one woman's fate. It was about whether the courts would finally acknowledge that survival, under any circumstances, should never be a crime. As testimony unfolded, the stakes grew even higher. The defense presented a harrowing account of what happened inside the jail cell, while the prosecution sought to cast doubt on her story. The case was no longer just about whether Joan had acted in self-defense. It was about whose story the legal system was willing to believe. Would the jury recognize her as a woman who had fought for her life? Or would they accept the prosecution's narrative that she was nothing more than a criminal looking for an escape? Beneath the legal arguments, two pivotal questions loomed over the case. Could a black woman in 1975 America successfully claim self-defense against a white man? And even more crucially, would the court recognize that sexual assault posed a life-threatening danger, justifying the use of deadly force? These were not just legal questions. They were a direct challenge to centuries of systemic injustice. With the nation watching, Joan's case became more than a trial. It became a referendum on justice itself. The outcome would not only determine whether she would walk free or face the death penalty, but also whether the law would finally acknowledge a simple, undeniable truth: no one should be condemned for defending their own life. The courtroom fell silent as the jury, a rare balance of 6 black and 6 white jurors, prepared to announce their decision. After weeks of testimony, the verdict arrived like a thunderclap: not guilty. Joan Little had done the unthinkable. She had stood trial for killing a white man and walked free. The ruling was not just about one woman's fate. It shattered long-standing barriers in America's legal system. Shockwaves rippled through the nation. Never before had a black woman successfully argued self-defense against a white male attacker and won. Her case forced a reckoning, challenging the legal system's failure to protect marginalized women. The verdict became a landmark moment, proving that a woman's right to defend herself could not be ignored, no matter the racial and social dynamics at play. But Joan's victory came at a cost. While the courtroom battle had ended, the fight for her safety and freedom never truly stopped. Law enforcement and political forces that had sought to see her executed did not simply forget. She remained under scrutiny, her name forever linked to a case that many saw as a threat to the status quo. In the years that followed, legal troubles continued to haunt her. The justice system that once put her on trial never stopped watching, and she found herself entangled in further allegations and arrests. The weight of her past followed her, a reminder that some victories come with scars that never fade. Despite the hardships, Joan Little's case stands as a defining moment in the battle for justice. Her story is more than a legal precedent. It is a testament to the power of resistance. Decades later, her name remains a symbol of the fight against racial and gender injustice, proving that one act of defiance can change history forever. The story of Joan Little was not just another legal battle. It was a defining moment in the fight for justice. Her case forced America to grapple with uncomfortable realities about race, gender, and power within the legal system. It was a rare instance where a black woman's right to defend herself was acknowledged, challenging deeply rooted biases that had long shaped courtroom outcomes. Beyond the headlines and legal arguments, Joan's trial left an undeniable impact on self-defense laws. It set a precedent that would shape future cases involving survivors of violence, especially those from marginalized communities. Her fight was not just for herself. It was for every person who had ever been denied justice simply because of who they were. But the question remains, did the verdict truly deliver justice? Was this a victory, or just a momentary break in a system still stacked against the most vulnerable? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more true crime cases that challenge history, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that matters.